Numbers in a story are like characters, if they're important. And sometimes the number is important, but too often in too many stories people put in numbers because they think they ought to. And the number actually isn't important, and it becomes an unnecessary character and needs to be killed off. There are various rules I'm going to call, laughingly, Jonathan's rules of how to deal with numbers. I've nicked most of them from Michael Blasland, and one of my recommendations is that you read his book, The Tiger That Isn't, which is all about how to handle numbers, and where many of the concepts I'm using came from. But, for example, if I were to say to you, how many sheep do you see in that picture? Make me an offer.
3.
See? Perfect. Who said 7? Why? There are no wrong answers. Don't be embarrassed.
Because there's 7 sheep of which you see a part.
Fair enough. And who said 3? Because?
We've got 4 lambs and 3 ewes.
Yeah, and that ewe looks quite pregnant, I would say. I chose this picture ever so carefully. So the first question is, okay, I said sheep. Somebody correctly said, well, those are lambs. I might mean lambs. I might mean, you know, woolly, furry animals hanging around in a field. Who's asking? Now, who's counting? The first rule is who's counting and who's asking. Who am I to ask? Am I from, well, for a few more months from the Common Agricultural Policy, checking how much to give you as a subsidy because you have so many sheep? Am I from HMRC, checking your income tax return because you claim to have this many sheep that you sold or bought and you haven't? Am I just a sort of animal census person? Is that half sheep there a half sheep? Do we want to count that? Is that you going to give birth in the next couple of days, in which case that field's population is about to change? Do we mind that it's a snapshot of today? All these numbers, they're all complications, and by just saying quite correctly 7 or quite correctly 3, you know, we have 2 widely different, we have more than 100% difference of what's there. So numbering is, firstly, it's not about what the number is, it's about who wants to know and why, you know, why do they want to know. So sometimes you can't make a count at all, or unless you want to go to sleep. Please don't count these sheep now. So counting sheep is the first image I want you to retain. Equally, here's a who's counting. How many people in a Mini, excuse me madam, how many people in this Mini, says the policeman. You would like to minimize that because you're going to be arrested for dangerous driving or overloading a vehicle. If you're talking to the Guinness Book of Records, you want to prove that you've got 13 people in a Mini and beat the previous record of 12. So who's counting? Guinness Book of Records, the record claimer, or the police? Gives you a different answer. Same as when I talk to my accountant about how my business is going, and when I talk to HMRC about my business is going, and if I were a listed company, when I talk to my shareholders about how my business is doing. 3 different audiences who want to hear 3 different things from the same numbers. So you've got to always go back to who wants to know, who's counting, who's asking. Now, what about this kind of sample? What do we think of a tweet like that in terms of who's counting and who's asking?
It's an open poll on Facebook, so it's not statistically significant, is it?
No. It's you know, an astonishing, well, exactly, the clue is in the word astonishing. An astonishing 97%, I don't think 97% of it has been either way in this argument. I mean, if you wanted to ask the right people, you could 100%. I mean, he's just not polled very well if he thinks there's only 3% disagree with him. It's people who've passed it around and said, go on, we must at least show that there's other people out there. Again, who's asking? He is. So that's the first one. But then let's get back to actually, this is a rule which is straight out of Blasland, is it really a big number? So, for example, if I found a malfunctioning coin machine, dispensing machine here in the university, and it was spitting out a £1 coin every second. Plunk, plunk, plunk. Imagine you find it and you nobody around to report it to. You decide you can keep the money that comes out of it. So if you want to wait to collect 100 quid for free, how long are you going to have to hang around? 1 a second? 1 minute 40 seconds. What about if you want to hang around for 1 million? How many days and nights are you going to have to camp there and guard that machine with your life?
32?
Not quite. No. I know where you're going with that.
Yeah,
We're coming to that.
Yeah, okay.
It's 11 and a bit, about 11 and a half days. It's not bad. 1 million seconds is only just over 11 days. Okay, and this is where the 32 comes in. So now you're so encouraged by making your first million and by sitting by a machine for 11 days, you want 1 billion. Now, how long are you going to have to stay for 1 billion?
Almost 32 years.
You're just over 32 years. No, sorry, just under 32 years. So 32 years to get to your 1 billion seconds. So we toss millions and billions out with only 1 letter difference, but 3 noughts different. And that just in practical terms, 1 billion seconds is 32 years. And just to labour the point, 1 trillion seconds is 32,000 years. So that is an awful long time to sit by a machine to get you 1 trillion. So when we talk about big numbers, yes, 1 million sounds a lot, and it's certainly a lot more than 100, but 1 billion is 1,000 times more. So when we start talking about a government program that's going to spend 5 million, it sounds a lot of money. And it is. If I asked you for 5 million, none of you, I think, would write me a cheque here and now. But we're a country of 67 million people with, I would guess, somewhere around 30 odd million taxpayers. Probably a bit more. Households, if you like. So if we want to rustle up £1 million through taxes, you know, a quick whip round of £1 each, and we can have 30 million by lunchtime. And 1 billion is only 1,000 times that. So when we talk about the billions that we give to the EU, have you noticed on the back of your tax coding letter, you get a breakdown of where your taxes have gone? Because I'm self-employed, I don't get one, but my wife's one, she pays a fairly typical amount. She's a school teacher, a fairly typical amount of tax. And at the bottom, so it goes, you pay this much for the police, this much for health, blah, 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 blah. And right at the bottom was membership of the EU, 72 quid a year out of her taxes. So it's an example of where the billions that sound horrendous when they're in a tabloid newspaper is actually relatively small change. I mean, I wouldn't like to lose £1 billion by mistake, but in terms of when you've got taxes coming in, you could make £1 billion by taking, I think it's 17 quid off each taxpayer. Just like that. Hardly anyone would notice. So when people then say, in government, some years ago, I think during the Gordon Brown premiership, they published a proposal for early years, more spending on early years kids, so under 5s. And they were going to spend 10 million, I think it was, over 5 years. Well, that's 2 million a year. And then you divide it by the number of children involved, and it worked out at 50p per infant. So there you had this massive sounding policy they wanted to puff up, but actually when you break it down, it's only 50p per person affected. So you've got to do these sort of quick mental, well, have a little table in your head, if you like, of basic things like, you know, the 67 million people in this country, you know how many taxpayers there are, you know how many times you need to divide 1 billion by the number of taxpayers, and so on. To just decide, just break it down. Is 10 million over 5 years a lot of money? Actually, not. I'd love 10 million quid over 5 years, but I'm not a government agency, in which case it's puny. So you have to think it through. Yeah, we did all that. Yes. So adults taxpaying age, it's £25. You get 1 billion with 25 quid per taxpaying age person. So, anyone want to guess the top 3?
MOD, International Aid Health.
You put social security and pensions together.
Yeah, DWP.
Yeah.
Is, yeah.
DWP.
DWP, is that above health or below?
That's above.
So you're going DWP,
Yeah.
health,
NHS.
well, NHS and the Department of Health, because that's one, like DWP is one. Okay. So that's, and what about the next one?
What is DWP?
MOD, I'm sorry. That's
So you're saying MOD?
millions.
Local government? I don't know.
That's not a department, unfortunately. Well, it is
Yeah.
DECLOG, but it's not.
I moved to the US 5 years ago, so I've forgotten what the name of the UK.
The
government
big,
departments are.
I think your first two are right. So, well, it's a year since I did this, so I'm actually with you. I don't know the answer by heart. Actually not. Well, definitely health and DWP are at the top. The question is defence next in the current climate? Anyone think defence is third? Anyone thinks, you suggested international development. Do you want to rethink that, or are you going to keep it?
No, I'll throw it out because it's one of those things that the Daily Mail tell you they spend hundreds of millions on, but actually they spend a very tiny proportion.
It's not even 1.5% of GDP, so it's going to be way down the bottom. You're talking about 328 billion, so give me, how many billion do you think? So let's go for DWP, so all the work and pensions, benefits, everything. Make me an offer. If that's, there are 25 departments and it's 328 million.
120.
120 billion?
80.
NHS is about 100 and a bit.
Yeah.
And it's second on the league table.
Yeah.
140.
Go 140, anyone want, any advance on 140? I have a little sort of government auction here. It's fun, isn't it, that a whole load of people who are sort of involved in and around journalism don't actually know the answer to this. And neither do I, you think I'm making a point. Okay, it is top three, ready? Oh, I forgot education was up there. Right, spending limits this is, so they can go over this. So health is 117. Who said 140? That was you, I
I
think.
said health was about just over 100.
Yeah,
But
spot on. But then education, I'd forgotten education was second.
Yeah.
And defence is only 35 billion. So, but we've then reached, we're well over the half the 328. We're only 3 departments in. We've got 22 to go. But then if you divide it, so you divide it by, this was in 2018, 66 million. So actually on your tax bill, it's not that much. Education's a cheat because it comes out of your, a lot of it comes out of your council tax, but you pay for local schools. So we all know about the bus, but then if you just, it's £8.79. That 350 million a week is about 8 quid, 9 quid per taxpayer. So yes, it's annoying if you don't like it, but 9 quid of your money, really, per week, 450 a year. So there's NHS spending, a bit more like it. It's like when I talk to Americans about the difference between Medicare and the NHS, and they go, oh yeah, it's a free country and we have, I said, but how much do you spend, a friend of mine who's 70 something, how much do you spend on your insurance? Oh, loads. You've got to be on about 3 different schemes, and you're paying through your taxes for Medicare and Medicaid anyway, and it's way over what we're spending. And they say, oh no, well, it's communism if you have single payer. So the 3.5 questions about any number in any story. How big is it really? Who's asking? Who's counting? Compare it to what? Compared to now? Compared to last year? Compared to 10 years ago? Always having a comparison is helpful. It's like if I said there are 207 people at CIJ summer conference this year. Is that good? Don't know. What was it last year? Don't know. What do we want it to be? Did they hope to sell 400 tickets or 200 tickets? If it's 200 tickets, they've done well. If it's 400 tickets, it's not so good. So who's asking, who's counting, and compare it to something. And then dynamically, is it going up or down? These are basics, but even when I was on the desk at World Service, and you'd get some figures just in with money in them or numbers in them, the temptation just to report, so and so says they've raised this much, or they've spent this much, or the GDP of this country is this much. Absolutely meaningless. I mean, true, but meaningless. It helps the audience in no way if you don't do any of that. And if you can't do any of that, I wouldn't bother reporting it at all. and wait till I could. I put that one there, the averages. This is a story, a friend of mine worked on the railways around the time the first Eurostars were being run through the tunnel. These old models that came out of Waterloo Station, and they ran on the good old third rail electric, which delivered the electric as far as the tunnel, and then they switched to overhead. These were built by the French, so they said, how high off the ground does the shoe have to be to pick up the electricity? So how far down the train do you want us to hang these shoes? And they went, well, the average height of the rail, because it varies a bit, the average height is so many centimetres above the ground. They blew away so many of them in the first prototypes because the average was useless. Half the time it had gone under the average, so the shoe wasn't even touching and it was just dangling there. And then suddenly the rail would come up and meet it and go higher than the average and break the shoe off. So they broke loads of them because the French had gone with, okay, we'll use the average then, and they didn't put enough spring in it, and the average was totally useless. If we were doing a survey now of average income in this room, which I'm not going to do, and then Bill Gates walks in, suddenly the average income of this room has gone up by a substantial amount, and when he walks out again, it goes down again. I went to a hospital clinic the other day where I was by roughly 20 years the youngest person there. Great, I brought the average age down by just walking into the clinic. And then everybody felt a lot older when I'd walked out. Absolute rubbish. The average is useless on its own. Unless the normal standard average, which our Excel spreadsheets will do, add up the total samples, divide by the number in the sample. Much better to do things like medians and modes. I'm now going to give you, this is a different thing to do with statistics. Just for fun, I'm going to give you how many? 2, 4, 6, 7. Right, if you form into a 3 and 2 2s, I'm going to give you some die. Not coloured die. Well, they are coloured, but they're dice. In each set, so I'll give you 3 sets. One of these, so you work with this guy. Would you like to work these 3? And if you'd like to work with your neighbour, you've got 5 minutes to see if you can work out which is the loaded die in that set. Basically, I don't need you to find it. I need you to work out how to find it and tell me how you're going to do it.
How are you defining loaded? How are you defining loaded?
It goes for it's predominant. One number is particularly predominant on one of them. All right, I'm not going to make you go all the way through it. Has anybody come up with a method, what they're going to do to work this out? Have you got a plan? Yeah.
We're going to roll each die 5 times, measure which numbers come out on those 5 times.
5 times?
Yeah, ideally more.
But just as a
How many more?
Well,
10,000?
I think
100,000.
100 times each? Okay. 5 first, 100. How about you?
We rolled them, 3 times? Saw if any came more often than the others. So we thought if it was loaded, like the number 6, if you're wanting to cheat
Yeah.
and gambling, would come up more often. So we rolled them a few times and saw if any numbers came up.
And did they?
6 didn't work for us, did it?
Six
Six didn't work for us.
2 of the pictures came up twice.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
All right.
But I
How about you?
That's coincidence.
I'm thinking you have to roll it about 10,000 times.
Ideally, yeah. I did this with a bunch of students just to see it, and within 5 minutes, one of them said not only had they got a method, they'd found it. Of course, me being me, I mean, one of them did ask me the very good question of why would I have a set of loaded dice, to which I could only reply, well, why do you think? And then I just left it like that. No, you need to roll them hundreds of times each to be sure that there is something going on.
We tried weighing them in our hands.
That would do as well. The main thing is to look at sampling. Yes.
Could you do it with 7s? Because the die always adds up to 7 on the opposite side. It goes 6, 1.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then so
Well,
you do. Sorry, what are you proposing?
I'm trying to think of it. I'll just back to pending as a way of possibly getting around it.
But how many times would you need to throw it?
It's still a load.
You need a lot,
Still a load.
a lot. So part of the thing is, I mean, human beings don't quite get randomness. The fact my students here last year took only about 6 or 8 rolls before they said, "Oh, here it is," because actually, random isn't. Is really random. In a long, say a 10,000 sequence, there would be quite a few times you got 3, 3, 3, or 6, 6, 6, 6, 6. Lots of those, people when iPods were a thing, and you could listen to it, you put all your music on an iPod. People complained that it wasn't random because they were getting 2 or 3 tracks from the same album in a row. Saying, how random? That's not random. Well, yes, it is actually. It is totally random. And there are books, for various reasons, there are books of random numbers. And sure enough, if the random number generator may well generate a run of 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way through to 0, back to 0. So randomness, we're looking at normal distribution. So we would want the dice, to, we'd do a load. This might represent, I don't know, 10,000, 100,000 rolls. And most of them, in fact, with a die, it should just be 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you shouldn't have any tails. This sort of ideal standard normal distribution is for, nobody believes it exists in the wild. It's an ideal. And you can think of some populations that might be a bit like that. You could say, I mean, human height. You'd probably got some very, very tall people, and then, a few similar, and then come down until you've got, very tall people here. The great mass of humanity is within a certain range. And understanding that is what throws people off. And they think, ooh, you have a time when, this is in the Blastland book, that, and it's a famous case of a village in Britain somewhere, I forget where 5 people got the same rare cerebral cancer within a few months of each other. So the villagers went and tore down the new mobile phone mast that had been erected above that village, on the hill above the village, ripped it down, and were taken to court for criminal damage. And they kind of got away with it. The jury sort of said, no, they're within their rights because it's clearly causing brain cancer. But it's terrible for the 5 people and their families, but that's just a blip. It's a statistical blip. You're going to, one of the experiments is if you have a square meter of carpet and I throw a load of rice, dry rice across it, there are going to be some squares that have got dozens of grains and 1 or 2 that got just 1. There will be some that, that just have a lot of rice on it for no particular reason. So understanding randomness and why it's important to look at this kind of sample is very important. And when people talk about statistical significance, this is what they're talking about, that 5 people in one village in 1 year is not, sadly, statistically significant. So, I know I promised you about half an hour of this. I'll just make a couple of things. I mentioned before that we'd talk about averages. So if you have a thing called the mode, the median, the mean is what we call the average. And when you have a symmetrical distribution, the mean, the one that we all tend to do from school, is the same as the median and the mode. The mode is simply the largest number in the most frequent number in the sample. So if we had a survey of all our salaries again, seems to be an obsession of mine, but let's put them into ranges. We'd have some people who are under £10,000. I doubt if we'd have anybody over £100,000. And we'd have, if I had the ranges right, there would be one range, let's say 20 to £30,000 a year, there might be 3 or 4 people with it. And then there'll be some smaller ones and maybe one bigger one. So you will have a mode which is, there are, let's say human height, we get to, say 5'10"-ish, and the most people around that, and especially if you take it in 10 centimeter groups, there will be one group that is the biggest population. But the one that scientists like a lot is the median. That is where exactly half is below it and half, it is the middle sample, half above, half below. And So then, when you start doing asymmetrical stuff, this might be about poverty, and here are the outlying rich people, the numbers of them here and the salary along here. So the most frequent salary may well be less than the mean, because when Bill Gates turns up, it pulls the mean to the right. So when you're reporting an average, you're not doing everybody, unless you want to make it sound really, really good. And this has got your very rich people over here, and we got the 98%. That's going to pull the mean over there. So the mean salary is not very helpful. If I was running, say, an office cleaning business, and I'm a horrible employer, which I probably would be, I might pay my people minimum wage and drive around in a limo of my own, because I'm drawing a huge salary and then I'm paying them minimum wage. Along comes an investigative journalist, and I said, don't worry, the average salary at Stoneman Enterprises is, 50,000 a year. Yeah, but the mode is 8,000 a year. The most common salary in my workforce is 8,000. And my salary drags the mean way over to the right. So don't trust the mean. And do understand the median. I had a long series of discussion with people that the median is difficult to put in a script or in an article. But actually, explaining it's the middle sample if you line them all up in the right order. But just saying, it's exactly halfway. Half of them are below it, half the sample's below it, and half's above. It's nice and simple. Once I realised that, it becomes easier to describe. This is a typical journalistic use of percentages, which I hate. My big rule on percentages, is your percentage sign really necessary? So crimes reported in Honiton, which is a small market town in Devon, rose more than 20% compared to the same month last year, 2016 from 17. When I looked it up, would you like to have a hazard a guess at what the two numbers were?
5 and 6.
10 and 3.
It was more than that. It had gone up. I remember the new number was 34, and last year's was therefore 22, 23, something like that. It was, it was 12 more crimes, I think, in a year. So one a month more. Again, statistically not that significant, but by sticking a percentage on it, you make it sound like a crime wave. And people do that all the time. Things like, oh yes, that's right, 34, 28 last year. That was it. And this is 2,600%. That's somebody with a calculator, just going, I can do percentages, me. To me, I don't know if you remember this case, it was a thing that was out of copyright, as it were, drug copyright. It was ready to go generic, and they then decided they'd hike the price up. And so it went from, £3.50 a packet to 40-something pounds a packet. I mean, I can't do the maths. The trouble is you're making the audience do the maths just to make it look good. 2,600%. All you need to do is say, yesterday it cost this, today it cost this. And nobody's going to do that in percentage. They're going to go, if it's gone up to over 40 quid a packet from whatever it was, less than 10 quid a packet, we're being ripped off. You don't need percentages. Is your percentage really necessary? So don't make the audience do the arithmetic. So somebody, I forget who it was, commissioned the RAC Foundation to do proper research on, do speed cameras reduce accidents? And they got a proper statistician, and they said, whatever you want, you design the experiment, you tell us what you want, we'll give you the numbers. So he went away, thought about it, said, okay, I need figures for this kind of road, going back over this many years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He got a proper methodology, and he looked at all the numbers. Then, in the exercise, you design it. So this was his 2010. He came up with this, the evidence. There you go. That was The Guardian. And that was the Daily Mail. reading the same report. And he hedged it around very carefully, and he couldn't really prove it. But of course, there were some places where the number went up, and other places where it went down. And you cherry pick it, and you think, even if you think you're being good, you sort of look at it and say, oh, look, there's a stretch of road where it's gone down. You know, is that, do you want to measure the stretch of road? Do you want to just say, is it in length? Is it the number of accidents that there were there and now there aren't any? But supposing you had 10 accidents there, let's say a particular spot, 10 accidents there last year, this year, 4. Okay, and we put the speed camera in 6 months ago. What are we saying? Well, have you heard the term regression to the mean? So when you have something that is, you might have a very bad year. Maybe 10 was a bad year, and 4 is a normal year. Maybe 4 is about a good year, and 10 is a normal year. You don't yet know. And if you start measuring, you say, okay, how long before the camera was put there do you want to count? The day before? No, that's stupid. A month before? Pretty stupid. 6 years before? Have you got the figures? Maybe. So then you ought to do 6 years after. And look, and just look at the patterns. And in fact, you know, you cannot neatly get there. I could even say, you know, first of all, say it's going to rain in the southeast. Well, if I'm fairly good at forecasting, it's going to rain somewhere in the southeast. Define the southeast. Who's counting? Who's asking? You know, I might say it's going to rain in Lewisham, but Lewisham is a big borough. Maybe it'll rain this end of Lewisham and not the other end. Am I right or am I wrong? Well, to the people who put their washing out in the wet bit, they're really annoyed I got it wrong. The people who are still playing tennis in the dry at the other end of Lewisham are quite happy with my forecasting. So I think you'll find they abandon it because you can't even define. You say, you've either got to say it's going to rain on that spot of Earth in the next 24 hours or not, and be absolutely right. But if you say, look, what are you going to say? Lewisham, the Isle of Wight, all these places are quite big, a particular county, a particular city. It's like when they talk about defining a white Christmas, you know, want to predict a white Christmas. The actual definition is almost it's why it hardly ever happens. It's a measurable number of flakes of snow fall on pretty much Broadcasting House, I think it is, on somewhere between midnight and midnight on the 25th of September. That's a white Christmas. So 4 flakes of snow. It doesn't matter if the Cairngorms are covered in snow. It's got to be, you know, at least 4 or 5 flakes of snow on television, on Broadcasting House, I think. But it's, you know, you've got to, if you're going to do forecasting, you've got to define what you mean. You play by the rules. I'm going to stop there on the numbers thing and just leave you with a summary of the 5 rules, which I haven't covered all of. I haven't done risk with you. But if you stick with those, you'll probably keep your job, and you certainly won't mislead your audience.